Let's get right into it. Number 10. The Monster Study. Imagine being a kid who already stutters a little, and then some adults in lab coats show up and basically gaslight you into thinking your voice is broken beyond repair. That's not a horror movie plot. That's the actual 1939 Monster Study. Researchers at the University of Iowa wanted to see if stuttering could be taught instead of just inherited. So they rounded up 22 orphans, yes, orphans, because apparently the phrase ethics review board didn't exist yet, and split them into two groups. One group got speech therapy that was supportive, like, "You're doing great, keep talking." The other group? They were told their speech was full of mistakes, that they were doomed to fail socially, and basically bullied by professionals. Guess which group developed severe speech problems that lasted for years? The kicker is, the experiment didn't even prove what they wanted. Instead of showing that stuttering could be taught, it mostly showed that if you emotionally wreck children, they'll be emotionally wrecked. Shocker. The study's nickname, Monster Study, was literally given by the researchers themselves because they knew it was messed up. That's like robbing a bank and then calling yourself the felony crew. At least they were self-aware. Basically, this experiment taught us less about stuttering and more about how science in the 1930s was just an elaborate excuse for psychological torture. Number 9. The Little Albert Experiment. So, picture this. You're a 9-month-old baby, chilling, vibing with your stuffed animals, and then some dude in a tie decides to give you a lifetime phobia of fuzzy things. That's Little Albert, one of psychology's most infamous train wrecks. In 1920, John Watson and Rosalie Reimer wanted to prove that fear could be conditioned, like Pavlov's dogs but with way more trauma. They introduced baby Albert to a white rat. At first, he was cool with it, probably thinking, nice pet, 10 out of 10 would pat again. But then every time Albert touched the rat, the researchers slammed a steel bar with a hammer behind his head. Instant trauma. Pretty soon, Albert started bawling just at the sight of the rat. But here's where it gets even worse. The fear spread. The baby started freaking out at rabbits, dogs, fur coats, and even Santa Claus beards. So yeah, one baby basically became terrified of anything remotely fuzzy, all thanks to science. Oh, and nobody ever deconditioned him. They just sent him home still traumatized. Later investigations suggest little Albert may have died young from illness, meaning he never even got a chance to grow up and tell a therapist, "Yeah, my fear of bunnies comes from being an unpaid baby intern in a horror experiment." Moral of the story, don't weaponize rats against babies. Or really, don't weaponize anything against babies. Number 8. The Stanford Prison Experiment. You know that saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely? Well, in 1971, Philip Zimbardo basically said, let's test that on college kids. He turned the Stanford basement into a fake prison, assigned students to play guards or prisoners, and sat back to watch chaos unfold. Within hours, the guards started humiliating and abusing the prisoners. We're talking psychological torment, sleep deprivation, and forcing people to do degrading tasks. The prisoners, meanwhile, broke down emotionally. And Zimbardo, who was supposed to be the neutral scientist, was also the prison superintendent, egging the guards on like some twisted dungeon master. It was supposed to last 2 weeks. It got shut down after 6 days. Not because Zimbardo suddenly grew a conscience, but because his girlfriend walked in, saw the mess, and was like, Phil? This is not normal. The experiment instantly became legendary, partly for its results, but also because it's so hilariously unethical it reads like parody. Critics later pointed out that the guards were coached to be cruel, which basically makes the whole thing bad improv theater. But the experiment still left a scar on psychology, proving how easily humans slip into power trip mode when given a badge and some rules. In other words, give a college kid a whistle and suddenly he thinks he's Emperor Palpatine. Number 7. Milgram's Obedience Experiment. Let's say a stranger in a lab coat told you to electrocute someone. Like really zap them. Would you do it? Most people want to believe they'd say, no thanks, I'm not auditioning for Saw. But in the 1960s, Stanley Milgram proved otherwise with his now infamous obedience experiment. Participants thought they were helping with a learning study. Their job? Sit in front of a shock generator and press buttons that delivered increasingly painful jolts to another person every time they answered incorrectly. Spoiler: the other person was an actor. The screams were fake. The sweating, nervous breakdowns of the participants? Very real. The shocking, pun intended, result was that about 65% of people went all the way to the maximum voltage, labeled danger, severe shock, even after the victim screamed, begged, and went silent. But because a guy in a white lab coat kept calmly saying, "The experiment requires that you continue." Translation: people will literally fry their moral compass when faced with authority. Afterward, many participants were horrified at themselves, some even needing therapy. And Milgram? He got his fame, but also eternal side-eye for putting volunteers through existential dread. Basically, the experiment showed that the just following orders excuse isn't just history, it's human nature. So next time you think you're a rebel, remember, your brain is just a clipboard away from becoming Darth Vader's intern. Number 6. The David Reimer case. This one's less quirky, more nightmare fuel. In 1965, baby David Reimer suffered a botched circumcision that destroyed his equipment. Doctors didn't know how to handle it, but one psychologist, John Money, had a bold and catastrophically wrong idea. He believed gender identity was purely learned, not biological. So he convinced the parents to raise David as a girl, Brenda. Money treated this as his grand gender experiment. He forced David into stereotypical girl roles, staged bizarre sexual rehearsals with his twin brother, and proudly published the case as proof that nurture overrides nature. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Brenda never felt like a girl, rebelled against the identity, and eventually transitioned back to living as David. The fallout was devastating. David struggled with trauma his entire life, eventually ending tragically in his 30s. The case is now infamous as one of the most unethical psychological experiments ever, with ripple effects in medical and gender research for decades. What's the big takeaway? Maybe don't treat babies as your personal science fair project. Or at the very least, don't let a guy named John Money decide anyone's fate. That name alone is a red flag. Number 5. The Landis facial expressions experiment. Okay, time to lighten the mood with something still terrible, but in a cartoonishly absurd way. In 1924, Carney Landis wanted to figure out if everyone's facial expressions were universal. Like, does disgust look the same on all humans? Fair enough question. His methods? Not so fair. He painted lines on participants' faces and then exposed them to random scenarios. Listening to jazz, smelling ammonia, looking at porn, yes, seriously, and even being shown live frogs. But then he asked participants to do one more thing: decapitate a live rat with a knife. Most people freaked out, understandably. But here's the horrifying kicker. A third of them actually tried to do it just because a researcher asked them to. And Landis? He didn't even get the data he wanted. Turns out, people's facial expressions are way too complex to chart. So, dozens of traumatized students and some unlucky rats later, the experiment basically proved nothing, except that peer pressure plus lab coats equals chaos. Imagine signing up for extra credit and accidentally becoming part of Ratatouille's darkest timeline. Number 4. The Aversion Project. If you thought therapy couldn't get darker, welcome to apartheid-era South Africa. The military had a secret psychological program in the 1970s and 80s where they tried to cure homosexuality in soldiers. The recipe? A cocktail of electroshock, therapy, chemical castration, forced hormone treatments, and even surgeries without consent. Doctors ran this under the banner of psychiatry, but in reality, it was state-sanctioned abuse disguised as science. Thousands of young conscripts were subjected to it. The worst part? These weren't even volunteers. Some were reported by their families, others were caught by the army, and suddenly found themselves strapped to a table getting zapped like broken toasters. Psychologist Aubrey Levin was one of the masterminds, and he literally believed he could reprogram people. Spoiler, he didn't. What he did was leave a trail of trauma and irreversible damage. The program finally ended when the apartheid government collapsed, but the Aversion Project remains a scar in psychology's history, a reminder that science can be used as a weapon when morality checks out of the room. So yeah, if someone ever tells you, "Trust me, I'm a doctor," just make sure it's not the kind of doctor who thinks jumper cabling your brain is a lifestyle fix. Number 3. The third wave. You know that one substitute teacher who takes things way too far? In 1967, history teacher Ron Jones decided to show his high school students what living under fascism might feel like. Instead of just teaching about it, he launched a full-on social experiment called the third wave. Day 1, he enforced strict discipline in class. By day 2, he gave them a salute and made them chant slogans. By day 3, the group had grown. Students were recruiting others into this movement, reporting on classmates who broke rules, and proudly wearing armbands. In less than a week, Jones had accidentally built a baby dictatorship inside his classroom. On day 5, he staged a fake rally where he revealed the truth. The movement was just a hoax to teach them about authoritarianism. Half the kids were stunned, some cried, and others were furious at being duped. Jones, meanwhile, basically realized he'd speed-ran the rise of fascism in a suburban high school. The lesson was effective, sure, but also wildly unethical. No permission, no safeguards, just 30 kids getting a crash course in how terrifyingly easy it is to surrender your freedom if someone barks orders with enough confidence. So if you ever think, that would never happen to me, just remember, it only took 5 days to turn teenagers into stormtroopers. Number 2. The Pit of Despair. This one sounds like a metal band, but it was actually Harry Harlow's pet project in the 1970s. You probably know Harlow as the wire mother versus cloth mother monkey guy, who proved baby monkeys prefer comfort over food. Important research, sure. But then he took a very, very dark turn. He built an isolation chamber, literally nicknamed the Pit of Despair, to study depression. Baby monkeys were placed alone in these steel cages for months. No contact, no comfort, no stimulation. Predictably, the monkeys came out severely disturbed, rocking back and forth, refusing to interact, and in many cases, unable to recover at all. Harlow said he wanted to model human depression. What he really modeled was how to traumatize an entire species for dubious science. Even his colleagues called it cruel, and psychologists aren't exactly famous for drawing the line at cruel. The Pit of Despair is now held up as one of the most inhumane experiments ever, and it's the reason animal research ethics got a much-needed overhaul. Basically, Harlow's work proved that love is essential for development. But it also proved that if you put Pit of Despair on your resume, you're not getting invited to any dinner parties. Number 1. MKUltra. Ah yes, the crown jewel of wait, how was this even real? Experiments. MKUltra wasn't just one study, it was a whole CIA project that ran for decades, starting in the 1950s. The goal? To figure out mind control. Because apparently Cold War paranoia plus bottomless government funding equals, let's see if we can turn people into remote-controlled zombies. How did they try to do that? Oh, just the classics. Dosing unsuspecting people with LSD, hypnotizing them, subjecting them to sleep deprivation, sensory torture, and even experiments that involved brothels secretly run by the CIA. Yes, you heard that right, Operation Midnight Climax, actual name, was a setup where sex workers, paid by the government, lured men in while agents watched from behind one-way mirrors and spiked their drinks with psychedelics. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's in the declassified files. The worst part? A lot of participants never consented. Some were hospital patients, prisoners, or just unlucky randos who happened to drink the wrong cocktail. And many of them came out permanently damaged, psychologically, physically, or both. In the end, MKUltra didn't succeed in creating brainwashed super soldiers. What it did succeed in was becoming the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when you hand the CIA a blank check and a copy of Frankenstein. The project was only shut down after journalists exposed it in the 1970s, and even then, most of the documents were destroyed, which just makes it sound more like the season finale of a conspiracy drama. So yeah, while most unethical experiments at least gave us some kind of scientific lesson, MKUltra mostly proved that government scientists on LSD are just as reckless as college freshmen on spring break. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.